Elena Rodriguez had been working as a maid in the Morrison mansion for nearly 3 years, but nothing could have prepared her for what she witnessed that cold October evening. The grand estate sat on the outskirts of Seattle, hidden behind towering pine trees and wrought iron gates that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. Mrs. Catherine Morrison, the lady of the house, had always been peculiar, but lately her behavior had become increasingly disturbing. Eleanor remembered the first time she noticed something was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning when she arrived for work, her keys jingling softly as she entered through the servants' entrance. The house felt different that day, colder somehow, despite the expensive heating system that usually kept every room perfectly warm. She found Mrs. Morrison standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the marble countertop where a glass of what looked like tomato juice sat untouched. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," Elena had said cheerfully, hanging her coat on the designated hook near the door. "Shall I start with the upstairs bedrooms today?" Mrs. Morrison turned slowly, her pale blue eyes seeming to focus with difficulty. "Elena," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you're early today." Elena glanced at the antique clock on the wall. It was exactly 8 o'clock, the same time she arrived every day. "No, ma'am, I'm right on time," she replied gently, pulling her cleaning supplies from the cabinet. What happened next made Elena's blood run cold. Mrs. Morrison smiled, but it wasn't the warm, polite smile Elena had grown accustomed to over the years. This smile revealed teeth that seemed sharper than they should be, and her eyes held a strange, predatory gleam that made Elena instinctively take a step backward. "Of course you are," Mrs. Morrison said, her tongue darting out to wet her lips. "You're always so punctual, so reliable. That's what I appreciate about you, Elena." The way she said Elena's name sent chills down the maid's spine. It sounded almost hungry, the way someone might say the name of their favorite dessert. Elena forced herself to smile and busied herself with organizing her cleaning supplies, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that had settled in her chest. Over the following weeks, Mrs. Morrison's strange behavior became more pronounced. Elena would catch her staring at people through the windows with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. Delivery drivers, mailmen, even children walking home from school seemed to capture her attention in ways that made Elena nervous. She would stand motionless behind the heavy curtains, watching, waiting, almost like a predator studying its prey. The household staff had dwindled significantly in recent months. First, it was James, the gardener, who simply stopped showing up one day. Mrs. Morrison claimed he had quit without notice, but Elena remembered seeing his car still parked in the driveway the morning after he supposedly left. When she asked about it, Mrs. Morrison had snapped at her, something about James being irresponsible and unreliable. Then Maria, the cook, disappeared. She had been with the Morrison family for over a decade, and Elena knew she would never leave without saying goodbye. Maria had become like an older sister to Elena, teaching her English phrases and sharing stories about her family back in Mexico. One Friday evening, Maria was there preparing dinner as usual. Monday morning, she was gone, and Mrs. Morrison acted as if she had never existed. "Where's Maria?" Elena had asked, finding the kitchen empty and cold. Mrs. Morrison, who had been reading a book in the breakfast nook, didn't even look up. "Who?" "Maria the cook. She's worked here for years." "I don't know anyone named Maria," Mrs. Morrison replied flatly. "I've never employed anyone by that name." Elena felt her heart racing. She knew Maria had worked alongside her every day for months. They had shared countless conversations, laughed together, even cried together when Maria received news that her mother was ill. How could Mrs. Morrison simply pretend she never existed? The final straw came on a rainy Thursday evening in late October. Elena had stayed late to help prepare for a dinner party Mrs. Morrison was hosting the following night. The guest list was small but exclusive, featuring several prominent members of Seattle's social elite. As Elena was polishing silverware in the dining room, she overheard Mrs. Morrison on the phone with someone. "Yes, tomorrow night will be perfect," Mrs. Morrison was saying, her voice carrying that same strange, hungry quality Elena had noticed before. "I've been planning this for weeks." The mayor's wife, the judge's daughter, that young socialite everyone's been talking about. They're all coming. Elena paused in her polishing, something about Mrs. Morrison's tone making her skin crawl. She crept closer to the doorway, straining to hear more. No, no, Mrs. Morrison continued, and Elena could hear the smile in her voice. They have no idea what they're walking into. By the time they realize, it will be far too late. I've been so careful, so patient, but tomorrow night I feast. The word feast was spoken with such relish, such anticipation, that Elena dropped the silver spoon she had been holding. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing through the quiet house like a gunshot. The phone conversation stopped abruptly. "Elena?" Mrs. Morrison called out, her voice sharp. "Is that you?" Elena's hands were shaking as she bent to retrieve the spoon. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison. I'm sorry I dropped something." "Come here, please." Elena's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward the living room where Mrs. Morrison was seated. The older woman was holding the phone against her chest, her pale eyes studying Elena with an intensity that made the maid want to run. "How long have you been standing there?" Mrs. Morrison asked. "I just walked into the dining room a moment ago," Elena lied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I was polishing the silverware for tomorrow's dinner party." Mrs. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you heard nothing unusual?" "No, ma'am, just you on the phone. I wasn't listening, I promise." For a long moment, Mrs. Morrison said nothing, just stared at Elena with those cold, predatory eyes. Finally, she smiled that terrible smile again. "Good. That's very good, Elena. You know, loyalty is such an important quality in household staff. I do hope you understand that." "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. I would never repeat anything I heard in your home." "No, Mrs. Morrison said softly. "I don't believe you would." The way she said it made Elena's blood freeze. It wasn't gratitude or trust in her voice. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that suggested Mrs. Morrison had ways of ensuring Elena's silence that went far beyond simple employment agreements. Elena finished her work as quickly as possible and left the mansion with her heart pounding. She drove home to her small apartment, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Something was very, very wrong at the Morrison mansion, and those women coming to dinner tomorrow night had no idea what they were walking into. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, replaying Mrs. Morrison's phone conversation over and over in her mind. The hunger in her voice, the way she had said the word feast, the complete denial of Maria's existence, it all pointed to something far more sinister than Elena wanted to believe. She thought about calling the police, but what would she tell them that her employer had sounded strange on the phone, that she had a bad feeling about a dinner party? They would think she was crazy, or worse, they might contact Mrs. Morrison directly. Elena shuddered to think what might happen to her if Mrs. Morrison discovered she had been spreading suspicions. But she couldn't just do nothing. Those women, the mayor's wife, the judge's daughter, and whoever the young socialite was, they were walking into danger. Elena was sure of it. She had to find a way to warn them, to protect them, without putting herself in even greater danger. The next morning, Elena called in sick to work. She spent the day researching the guest list for Mrs. Morrison's dinner party, using social media and local news articles to identify the women who would be attending. She found photos of all three: Margaret Stevens, the mayor's wife, a kind-looking woman in her 50s who volunteered at local charities; Jessica Chen, the judge's daughter, a young lawyer who had recently made headlines for her work with domestic violence victims; and Sophia Williams, the socialite, barely 25 and recently engaged to a tech entrepreneur. All three women were successful, well-connected, and completely unaware of what awaited them at the Morrison mansion. Elena stared at their photographs, feeling sick to her stomach. She had to do something, but she wasn't sure what. As evening approached, Elena made a decision. She would go to the mansion and try to find evidence of whatever Mrs. Morrison was planning. If she could document something concrete, she could call the police with real information instead of just suspicions. It was dangerous, but those three women's lives might depend on it. Elena parked her car several blocks away from the mansion and walked through the woods that bordered the property. She knew the grounds well after 3 years of employment, and she was able to approach the house without being seen from the windows. The dinner party was already in progress. She could see the guests through the large windows of the dining room, all dressed elegantly and apparently enjoying themselves. Mrs. Morrison was the perfect hostess, charming and attentive, making sure everyone's wine glass was full and the conversation flowed smoothly. To any observer, it looked like a perfectly normal dinner party among Seattle's elite. But Elena knew better. She could see something in Mrs. Morrison's posture, in the way she watched her guests, that reminded her of a cat watching mice. Elena crept around to the back of the house where a servant's entrance would allow her to slip inside undetected. She still had her key and she knew the security system well enough to disable it temporarily. Once inside, she moved carefully through the corridors, staying in the shadows and avoiding the areas where the dinner party was taking place. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she found it. Evidence of Mrs. Morrison's plans, something that would convince the police to take her seriously. She searched Mrs. Morrison's private office, her bedroom, even the basement storage areas, but found nothing obviously incriminating. It was in the wine cellar that Elena made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden behind several cases of expensive vintage bottles, she found a small room she had never known existed. The heavy wooden door was partially concealed by shadows, and it took Elena several minutes of feeling along the wall to locate the hidden handle. When she finally managed to open the door, the smell that rushed out nearly made her vomit. It was the smell of death, of decay, of something fundamentally wrong. Elena covered her nose and mouth with her sleeve and forced herself to step inside the hidden room. What she found there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The room was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, but it contained evidence of Mrs. Morrison's true nature. Hanging from hooks on the walls were clothes, James's work shirt, Maria's apron, and other garments Elena didn't recognize but that clearly belonged to people who were no longer alive. In the corner of the room was a large chest, old and ornate, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Elena approached it with trembling hands and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were personal belongings, wallets, jewelry, photographs, all items that Elena knew had belonged to the missing staff members and others she didn't recognize. At the bottom of the chest was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Elena opened it with shaking hands and began to read by the dim light filtering in from the wine cellar. The entries were written in Mrs. Morrison's elegant handwriting, but the content was anything but elegant. The journal detailed decades of careful hunting, of selecting victims and disposing of bodies. Morrison wrote about her victims with the detached clinical interest of a scientist studying specimens. She described their fear, their struggles, their final moments with a cold precision that made Elena's stomach churn. But it was the most recent entries that made Elena's blood run cold. Mrs. Morrison had been planning tonight's dinner party for weeks, carefully selecting her guests based on specific criteria. She wanted women who were successful, who would be missed, but whose disappearances could be explained away as voluntary departures or accidents. The journal detailed how Mrs. Morrison planned to drug the wine with a special concoction that would render her guests unconscious but not dead. She wanted them alive for what came next, something the journal described in terms that made Elena realize she was dealing with something far more monstrous than a simple serial killer. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the journal. She needed to get out of this room, out of this house, and call the police immediately. But as she turned to leave, she heard footsteps in the wine cellar outside. "I know you're down there, Elena," Mrs. Morrison's voice called out, echoing off the stone walls. "I could smell your fear the moment you entered my house." Elena's heart stopped. Mrs. Dick? Morrison had known she was there all along. She was trapped in the hidden room with nowhere to run, and upstairs, 3 innocent women were about to become the latest victims of whatever Mrs. Morrison truly was. "Come out, dear Mrs." Morrison continued, her voice getting closer. "There's no point in hiding. I have something very special planned for tonight, and I think you should be part of it." Elena looked around frantically for another way out, but there was none. The hidden room had only one entrance, and Mrs. Morrison was blocking it. She was trapped, and she could hear Mrs. Morrison's footsteps getting closer and closer to the hidden door. Elena clutched the journal to her chest and pressed herself against the far wall of the small room. She knew she was about to discover exactly what had happened to James and Maria, and she was terrified that she would never get the chance to warn anyone about what was really happening at the Morrison mansion. The footsteps stopped just outside the hidden room, and Elena could hear Mrs. Morrison breathing in the darkness beyond the door. When she spoke again, her voice was no longer human. It was something else, something ancient and hungry and utterly without mercy. "Hello, Elena. Shall we begin?" Elena's scream pierced the darkness of the wine cellar as Mrs. Morrison stepped into the hidden room. But the woman who entered was no longer the refined socialite Elena had known for 3 years. Her pale skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, revealing dark veins beneath the surface like a spider's web. Her eyes had changed from blue to a deep crimson that seemed to glow in the dim light, and when she smiled, Elena could see fangs where normal canine teeth should have been. "Surprised, my dear?" Mrs. Morrison asked, her voice carrying an otherworldly echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You've been such a faithful employee, Elena. Always punctual, always discreet. I've grown quite fond of you." Elena pressed herself against the stone wall, the journal still clutched to her chest. "You're not human," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mrs. Sakrisht." Morrison laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. "How observant." "No, I haven't been human for a very long time. Nearly 4 centuries, if we're being precise." She took a step closer, and Elena could see that her fingernails had elongated into sharp claws. "But I do so enjoy playing the role. It makes hunting so much easier when your prey trusts you." "The dinner party," Elena managed to say, finding her voice. "The women upstairs are having a wonderful time," Mrs. Morrison finished. Margaret was just telling the most amusing story about her charity work. "So dedicated to helping others, that one. I do admire altruism, especially when it's about to be extinguished." Her eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. "Don't worry about them just yet, Elena. The wine needs more time to take effect." Elena's mind raced. The drugged wine Mrs. Morrison had mentioned in the journal. "They don't know," she said. "Of course they don't know. They think they're having a lovely evening with Seattle's most respected widow. They have no idea they're dining with someone who has been feeding on their kind since before this country was even founded." "Mrs." Morrison moved with inhuman grace, seeming to glide rather than walk. "You know, Elena, I had planned to keep you alive a bit longer. You've been so useful cleaning up after my messes, maintaining the perfect facade of respectability, but curiosity, as they say, killed the cat." Elena clutched the journal tighter. "People will look for me. They'll look for those women upstairs." "Will they?" Mrs. Morrison tilted her head, considering. "You called in sick today, didn't you? And those 3 lovely ladies?" "Well, Margaret has been struggling with depression since her husband's political scandals. Everyone knows how fragile she's been. Jessica has made so many enemies with her domestic violence work, it wouldn't be surprising if she decided to disappear for her own safety. And poor Sophia, a young socialite overwhelmed by the pressure of her engagement to such a prominent man. These things happen." The casual way Mrs. Morrison discussed destroying these women's lives made Elena's blood boil, overcoming some of her terror. "You're a monster," she said. "I'm a predator, Mrs." Morrison corrected. "There's a difference. I've evolved beyond the limitations of mortality, beyond the weaknesses that plague your kind. I am perfection, Elena. I am what humanity aspires to become but lacks the strength to achieve." Elena's eyes darted around the small room, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze fell on an old silver letter opener that lay among the personal effects in the chest. Silver. Every horror movie she had ever seen flashed through her mind. Did that actually work against vampires, or was it just fiction? Mrs. Morrison noticed her glance and laughed again. "Oh, you sweet child. Are you thinking about silver, holy water, crosses?" She stepped closer, her red eyes boring into Elena's. "Let me tell you a secret about vampire lore, dear. Most of it is nonsense created by humans who were desperate to believe they had some power against us. Silver stings a bit, I'll grant you, but it won't kill me. Holy water is just water. And crosses? She gestured dismissively. I own several beautiful antique crosses upstairs. They make lovely decorative pieces. Elena's heart sank, but she refused to give up. Then how do you die? She asked, hoping to keep Mrs. Delford Morrison talking while she figured out some kind of plan. We don't, Mrs. Morrison said simply. Oh, there are ways to destroy us, but they're not the pleasant fairy tales humans tell themselves. Fire can do it if it's hot enough and sustained long enough. Complete dismemberment works, though it's rather messy. And then there's, she paused, her expression darkening. But you don't need to know about that. Elena caught the hesitation. There was something Mrs. Morrison didn't want to talk about, something that genuinely concerned her. What is it? Elena pressed. What are you afraid of? Mrs. Morrison's eyes flashed dangerously. I fear nothing, she snarled, and for the first time Elena heard uncertainty in her voice. Before Elena could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the mansion from somewhere upstairs. Mrs. Morrison's head snapped toward the ceiling, her expression shifting from predatory confidence to something that looked almost like panic. No, she whispered. He wouldn't. Not now. Another crash, louder this time, followed by what sounded like women screaming. Mrs. Morrison's face went ashen, her red eyes wide with something Elena had never expected to see there. Fear. Who is it? Elena asked. Who's up there? Mrs.? Morrison didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Elena by the arm with inhuman strength and dragged her from the hidden room. Elena tried to resist, but it was like fighting against a machine. Mrs. Morrison's grip was like steel, and Elena found herself being hauled through the wine cellar and up the stairs toward the main floor of the mansion. The sounds from upstairs grew louder as they climbed. More breaking glass, furniture being overturned, and the terrified screams of the 3 dinner guests. But there was another voice too, a man's voice, speaking in a language Elena didn't recognize but that sounded ancient and powerful. Mrs. Morrison was moving faster now, almost running, her perfect composure completely shattered. 400 years, she was muttering under her breath. 400 years of freedom, and he chooses now to find me. They reached the main floor, and Elena could see into the dining room where chaos reigned. The elegant table had been overturned, expensive china scattered across the floor. Margaret Stevens cowered behind an overturned chair, her elegant dress torn and her carefully styled hair disheveled. Jessica Chan was pressed against the far wall, her phone in her hand as she tried desperately to call for help. Sophia Williams had collapsed near the doorway, apparently unconscious from whatever Mrs. Morrison had put in the wine. And standing in the center of the destruction was a man unlike anyone Elena had ever seen. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the light around it. His skin was pale, but not the translucent pallor of Mrs. Morrison. Instead, it seemed to glow with an inner light that made him appear almost ethereal. He wore a long black coat that moved around him like liquid shadow, and his eyes were the deepest blue Elena had ever seen, like looking into the heart of a midnight ocean. But it was the power radiating from him that truly made Elena's breath catch. Where Mrs. Morrison felt cold and predatory, this man felt like a force of nature, like standing too close to a lightning storm. The air around him seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy, and Elena could sense that he was holding back immense power. "Catherine," the man said, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. 4 centuries of defiance. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't find you eventually?" Mrs. Morrison, Catherine stepped protectively in front of Elena, though whether she was protecting Elena from the man or using her as a shield, Elena couldn't tell. "Dominic," Catherine said, and Elena was shocked to hear her voice shake. "You have no authority here. I left your court willingly." "You fled," Dominic corrected, his blue eyes never leaving Catherine's face. You broke our most sacred laws, abandoned your responsibilities, and spent 4 centuries indulging in petty murders while I maintained order in your absence." Elena's mind reeled. Courts? This was beyond anything she had imagined. Catherine wasn't just a vampire. She was apparently some kind of vampire nobility who had run away from her responsibilities. Dominic's gaze swept the room, taking in the terrified women and the evidence of Catherine's planned massacre. His expression darkened further. "And this is how you've chosen to spend your exile? Terrorizing mortals like some feral newling?" "Their food," Catherine spat, "nothing more." "You've grown soft, Dominic. When did the great vampire king start caring about the lives of cattle?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees at Catherine's words. Dominic took a step forward, and Elena could see Margaret and Jessica press themselves further against the walls, apparently sensing the danger even in their drugged state. "When did you become so small?" Dominic asked softly, but his voice carried such weight that Elena felt it in her bones. "You were once a queen, Catherine. You ruled with wisdom and justice. Now look at you, hiding in the shadows, feeding on the innocent, living like a parasite." "I am free," Catherine said, but Elena could hear the desperation in her voice. "For the first time in 1,000 years, I am free to do as I choose. Freedom without purpose is chaos," Dominic replied, "and chaos without control is destruction. You have forgotten who you are, Catherine. You have forgotten what we are meant to be." Elena watched this exchange with growing amazement. These weren't just predators. They were something far more complex, with their own society, their own rules, their own conflicts. And apparently, Dominic was their king. "I won't go back," Catherine said, and now Elena could see tears of blood forming in her red eyes. "I won't return to that prison of responsibility and ancient laws. I won't spend eternity managing the affairs of creatures I've outgrown." Dominic's expression softened slightly, and for the first time Elena saw something like sadness in his immortal features. "You were my partner in all things, Catherine, my equal in power, my companion through the centuries. Do you think I wanted to rule alone? Do you think I haven't missed you every moment of these 400 years? The raw emotion in his voice made Elena's heart ache. This wasn't just about law and order. This was about love, about loss, about 2 immortal beings who had once meant everything to each other and were now on opposite sides of an unbridgeable gulf. Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," she sobbed, the sound horrible coming from a creature who had seemed so monstrous moments before. The weight of it all, the endless responsibility, the knowledge that every decision affects the lives of thousands of our kind. "I couldn't bear it anymore, Dominic. I couldn't bear being what I was meant to be." Dominic moved closer, his movements careful and deliberate. "Then don't bear it alone," he said gently. "Come home, Catherine. Come home and help me carry the burden, together, as we always did." For a moment, Elena thought Catherine might agree. Her red eyes searched Dominic's face, and Elena could see the longing there, the desire to return to what they had once been. But then Catherine's gaze fell on the 3 women in the room, on the evidence of what she had become, and her expression hardened. "It's too late," she whispered. "I've done too much, gone too far." "I'm not the woman you remember, Dominic. I'm not the queen you loved." "You are always the woman I love," Dominic said simply. "No matter what you've done, no matter how far you've fallen. You are Catherine, my eternal companion, and I will never stop believing in the goodness that still exists within you." Ayla felt tears streaming down her face. The raw emotion between these 2 immortal beings was overwhelming, and she was beginning to understand the true tragedy of the situation. Catherine wasn't just a monster. She was a broken queen who had lost herself in the weight of immortal responsibility. But Catherine shook her head, stepping back from Dominic's outstretched hand. "No," she said firmly. "I won't go back, and you can't make me." Dominic's expression grew cold again. "Actually, I can," he said quietly. "I am still your king, Catherine, and you have committed crimes against our most fundamental laws. You will face judgment for what you've done." Catherine laughed bitterly. "Will I? And what of these mortals? Will you let them remember what they've seen? Will you allow them to spread stories about our kind? Dominic glanced at Margaret, Jessica, and the unconscious Sophia. They will be taken care of, he said. Their memories will be adjusted, their trauma healed. They will remember nothing of this night except a pleasant dinner party that ended early. How civilized, Catherine sneered. How perfectly controlled. This is exactly why I left, Dominic. Your obsession with maintaining the masquerade, with keeping our kind hidden and controlled. We are gods among mortals, and you have us acting like guilty secrets. We are guardians, Dominic corrected. We have power, yes, but with power comes responsibility. We protect humanity from the darkness, Catherine, not become it. Elena listened to this exchange with growing understanding. The vampire world wasn't the simple good versus evil scenario she had imagined. It was complex, layered, filled with politics and responsibilities and moral ambiguities that went far beyond human comprehension. Catherine looked at Elena then, her red eyes focusing on the maid who had witnessed everything. "And what of this one?" she asked. "What of Elena Rodriguez, who has seen too much and knows too much?" Elena's heart stopped. In all the drama between Catherine and Dominic, she had almost forgotten her own precarious situation. Now both immortal beings were looking at her, and Elena realized that her life hung in the balance of whatever decision they made about her. Dominic studied Elena for a long moment, his blue eyes seeming to look straight into her soul. "She called for help," he said finally. "That's how I found you, Catherine." Elena Rodriguez made a desperate phone call to a number she shouldn't have known, pleading for someone to come home because someone was going to kill someone else. Her courage in the face of impossible odds brought me here. Elena stared at him in confusion. "I didn't call anyone," she said. "I've been trapped in the wine cellar. I don't even know who you are." Dominic smiled, and for the first time, Elena saw warmth in his ancient features. "Not yet," he said, "but you will. Time flows differently for our kind, Elena Rodriguez. Your future call reached into the past and brought me here at exactly the moment you needed me most." The implications of what he was saying made Elena's head spin. Time travel? Prophecy? Magic beyond anything she had ever imagined. But before she could process it fully, Catherine made her move. With inhuman speed, Catherine lunged toward Sophia Williams, her claws extended toward the unconscious socialite's throat. But Dominic was faster. He moved like shadow and lightning, intercepting Catherine mid-leap and catching her wrists in his hands. The two vampires struggled in the center of the room, their superhuman strength causing the very walls to shake. Elena could see that despite Catherine's speed and desperation, Dominic was clearly the more powerful of the two. His presence seemed to fill the entire space, pressing down on everything and everyone with the weight of absolute authority. "Enough!" Dominic said, and his voice carried such power that Elena felt it in her bones. Catherine stopped struggling, her body going limp in his grasp. "Catherine Blackthorne, by my authority as Vampire King, I place you under arrest for crimes against the Covenant, for unauthorized feeding, and for abandoning your sworn duties. You will return with me to face judgment." Catherine looked up at him with tears of blood still streaming down her pale cheeks. "And if I refuse?" Dominic's expression was infinitely sad but absolutely resolute. "Then I will do what I should have done 400 years ago when you first started down this path. I will end your suffering myself." Elena watched in horror as Catherine considered her options. The woman who had seemed so powerful, so terrifying just minutes before, now looked small and broken in Dominic's grasp. The weight of 4 centuries of mistakes pressed down on her shoulders, and Elena could see the exact moment when Catherine's resistance finally crumbled. "Very well," Catherine whispered. "I'll come with you. But know this, Dominic, the woman you loved died long before tonight. You're bringing home a stranger wearing her face." Dominic's grip on her wrists loosened slightly, becoming almost gentle. "Then I'll help that stranger remember who she used to be," he said softly. However long it takes, Elena watched as Dominic helped Catherine to her feet, his movements careful and gentle despite the circumstances. The vampire queen looked defeated, her shoulders slumped and her crimson eyes downcast. The transformation from predator to prisoner was complete, but Elena could see that Dominic took no pleasure in his victory. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The events of the evening had left her emotionally drained, and she wasn't sure she could process much more supernatural revelation. Dominic turned to her, his ancient blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made Elena feel exposed. "That depends on you, Elena Rodriguez," he said. "You've seen more tonight than most humans see in several lifetimes. You understand things about our world that we've spent centuries keeping hidden. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Elena looked around the destroyed dining room. Margaret Stevens and Jessica Chen were still pressed against the walls, their eyes glazed from the drugged wine but slowly beginning to clear. Sophia Williams remained unconscious near the doorway, her breathing steady but shallow. All three women were alive, but their lives had been forever changed by what they had experienced, even if they would never remember it. "You said you would erase their memories," Elena said, nodding toward the three guests. "Will you do the same to me?" Dominic exchanged a glance with Catherine, who was standing silently beside him like a shadow of her former self. "I could," he said carefully. "It would be the safest option for all involved. You could return to your normal life, and our world could remain secret." "But you don't want to," Elena said, reading something in his expression. "No," Dominic admitted. "I don't want to. You called for help, Elena, even though you didn't know you were doing it. Your courage brought me here in time to prevent a massacre. Your determination to protect innocent people, even at the cost of your own safety, shows a strength of character that is rare in any species." Elena felt a flutter of fear mixed with curiosity. "What are you asking me to do?" Catherine spoke for the first time since surrendering, her voice hollow but carrying traces of her former authority. "He's offering you a choice that hasn't been given to a human in over 3 centuries, Elena. He's offering you the chance to join our world willingly." "Join your world?" Elena repeated, not sure she understood. Dominic stepped closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "Our kind are not just predators, Elena, despite what Catherine's actions tonight might have suggested. We are guardians, protectors, keepers of the balance between the mortal world and the supernatural forces that exist beyond human understanding. We have a responsibility," Catherine added, and Elena was surprised to hear genuine regret in her voice. "A responsibility I abandoned when I fled. We protect humanity from threats they can't even imagine. Demons, dark sorcerers, creatures far worse than vampires. The masquerade we maintain isn't just to hide our existence, it's to preserve the innocent sleep of billions of mortals who are safer not knowing what lurks in the shadows." Elena's mind reeled. The scope of what they were describing was almost incomprehensible. "And you want me to be part of that?" "I want you to have the choice," Dominic said. "You've proven tonight that you have the courage and moral conviction necessary for such work. But I won't lie to you about what it would mean. Accepting our world means leaving your human life behind. It means responsibilities that span centuries, burdens that never end, and changes to your very nature that cannot be undone." Elena looked at Catherine, seeing her own potential future in the vampire queen's broken form. "What if I become like her? What if the weight of it all destroys who I am?" Catherine met Elena's gaze, and for the first time since Dominic's arrival, her crimson eyes showed something other than defeat. "Then you'll have something I didn't have," she said quietly. "You'll have someone who understands the burden, someone who will help you carry it when it becomes too heavy." Alia understood. Catherine had been alone in her responsibilities, isolated by power and duty until the pressure finally broke her. But Dominic was offering something different: partnership, shared purpose, mutual support through the difficulties ahead. "I don't understand everything you're telling me," Elena said honestly. "Your world is beyond anything I ever imagined. But those women, Margaret, Jessica, Sophia, they're alive because I refuse to stand by and do nothing. If there are others like them who need protection, others who don't even know the dangers that exist, then maybe I owe it to them to try." Dominic smiled, and Elena saw approval in his ancient features. "The choice is entirely yours, Elena, but know that once made, it cannot be easily unmade. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" Elena thought about her small apartment, her routine life as a maid, the simple existence she would be leaving behind. Then she thought about James and Maria, about all the people Catherine had killed over the centuries, about the 3 women who were alive tonight because someone had finally stood up to a monster. "I'm certain," she said. Dominic nodded solemnly. "Then we begin immediately. But first we must deal with tonight's aftermath." Elena watched as Dominic moved to each of the 3 dinner guests in turn. He placed his hands gently on their foreheads, and Elena could see a soft blue light emanating from his fingertips. Margaret, Jessica, and Sophia each relaxed under his touch, their expressions becoming peaceful. "What are you doing to them?" Elena asked. "Healing the trauma," Dominic explained as he worked, removing the memories of terror and replacing them with recollections of a pleasant evening that ended when Margaret received a call about her mother's health. They'll remember leaving early, taking care of each other, and arriving home safely. The drugs in their system will be neutralized, and any physical effects of their ordeal will be erased. "Is it permanent?" "Yes," Catherine answered. "When we alter memories, we don't simply suppress them. We replace them completely. As far as their minds are concerned, their false memories are the truth. It's kinder than leaving them with nightmares they could never explain or understand." Elena watched the process with fascination and growing understanding. This was what Dominic had meant about guardianship, not just protecting humanity from supernatural threats, but protecting them from the knowledge of those threats as well. When Dominic finished with the 3 women, he turned his attention to the mansion itself. Moving with practiced efficiency, he began repairing the damage from his confrontation with Catherine. Broken furniture reassembled itself under his touch, shattered china mended, and overturned items returned to their proper places. Within minutes, the dining room looked exactly as it had before chaos erupted. "How?" Elena breathed. "Time manipulation," Dominic explained casually. "Not true time travel. That's far more complex, but the ability to reverse the effects of recent events. It's one of the basic skills you'll need to learn if you're going to work with us." Elena stared at him. "You're saying I'll be able to do things like that?" "Eventually," Catherine said, and Elena was surprised to hear something almost like pride in her voice. "The transformation grants abilities far beyond normal vampire powers. You'll be faster, stronger, more resilient than ordinary vampires. But more importantly, you'll have access to the magical arts that allow us to maintain our guardianship duties." "Transformation?" Elena's heart began to race. "You mean becoming a vampire?" "Not exactly," Dominic said gently. "What we're offering you is something far rarer. True vampire queens and kings aren't made through simple feeding or blood exchange. We're born through a ritual that has been performed only a handful of times in the last millennium. It's a process that transforms not just your body, but your soul itself." Elena felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were discussing. "I thought there were only 2 of you." "There were," Catherine said softly. "For 400 years, Dominic has ruled alone while I played at being a petty predator. But the supernatural world is growing more dangerous, Elena. Old enemies are awakening, new threats are emerging, and the balance we've maintained for centuries is beginning to shift. We need a 3rd ruler, someone with the power and authority to help us face what's coming." Dominic nodded gravely. "The ritual that created Catherine and me draws its power from willing sacrifice, from the conscious choice to accept responsibility for others. That's why it can't be forced or coerced. The person must choose freely, understanding fully what they're accepting." Elena looked between the 2 immortal beings, seeing the weight of centuries in their eyes. "What exactly is coming? What threats are you talking about?" "Ancient ones," Dominic said. "Powers that predate human civilization that view the modern world as an aberration to be corrected. They've been sleeping for millennia, but something has begun to wake them. We're not sure what, but we know we'll need all our combined strength to face them when they fully emerge." Elena thought about her normal life, her simple concerns, her human limitations. Then she thought about the scope of what Dominic and Catherine were describing: threats to the entire world, responsibilities that spanned continents, power beyond imagination. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what happens to Elena Rodriguez? What happens to the woman I am now?" "She evolves," Dominic said simply. "She doesn't disappear, Elena. She grows into something greater. Your compassion, your courage, your determination to protect the innocent, these things don't change. They become the foundation for something magnificent." Catherine stepped forward, her crimson eyes meeting Elena's. "I won't lie to you about the difficulties," she said. "There will be times when the burden feels impossible to bear. Times when you'll question every decision, doubt every choice. Times when you'll wonder if humanity is worth the sacrifice we make to protect it. But there will also be times when you save lives that no one else could save," Dominic added. "Times when your actions preserve the peace of millions who will never know your name. Times when you'll stand between the darkness and the light, and your strength will be the only thing that keeps the world from falling into chaos." Elena closed her eyes, trying to process everything she had learned. When she opened them again, she found both vampires watching her with expressions of patient understanding. They weren't pressuring her, weren't trying to manipulate her decision. They were simply offering her a choice and waiting for her to make it. "The three women tonight," Elena said. "If I become like you, I'll be able to protect others like them?" "Yes," Dominic said without hesitation. "And the people who disappeared over the years, the ones Catherine killed? There are others like her out there?" "There are," Catherine admitted. "Vampires who have lost their way, who have forgotten the code that governs our kind. They'll need to be stopped, brought back into line, or dealt with." Elena understood the euphemism. Part of her new responsibilities would involve making life-and-death decisions about members of her own kind. It was a sobering thought, but not one that frightened her as much as she expected it to. "I have one condition," Elena said. Both vampires looked surprised. "What condition?" Dominic asked. "The people Catherine killed, James, Maria, and the others. Their families deserve to know what happened to them. Not the truth about vampires, obviously, but closure. Justice." Catherine's expression crumpled. "How do you propose we do that? We can't exactly put me on trial in human courts." "We can give their families peace," Elena said firmly. Anonymous tips leading to the discovery of evidence, fabricated stories about Catherine Morrison's crimes that give them someone to blame and hate. It won't bring their loved ones back, but it will end the uncertainty. Dominic smiled with genuine admiration. "Your first royal decree, and it's an act of compassion for the victims of the woman who will become your partner." "Yes, Elena. We can arrange that." Elena felt a sense of rightness settle over her decision. "Then I accept," she said. "I accept the responsibility, the transformation, and whatever comes with it." The moment the words left her lips, Elena felt a change begin deep within her chest. It started as a warm, tingling sensation, like sunlight spreading through her veins. But as the seconds passed, the warmth intensified, becoming something far more profound. Dominic and Catherine moved to stand on either side of her, each placing a hand on her shoulders. Elena could feel power flowing from their touch, ancient magic that reached into the very essence of who she was and began to reshape it. "The ritual has begun," Dominic said, his voice echoing strangely in Elena's ears. "There's no stopping it now." "Trust the process, Elena. Trust yourself." Elena felt her consciousness expanding, her awareness stretching beyond the confines of the mansion. She could sense every living thing within miles, the slow pulse of trees, the quick heartbeats of small animals, the complex thoughts and emotions of every human in the surrounding area. The sensation was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. Her body was changing, too. She could feel her muscles becoming denser, her bones strengthening, her senses sharpening to superhuman levels, but it wasn't painful. Instead, it felt like becoming more herself than she had ever been before. Most remarkably, Elena could feel her capacity for empathy expanding. Where before she had cared deeply about the people immediately around her, now she felt a connection to all of humanity. Every person became precious to her, worth protecting, worth fighting for. The responsibility Dominic and Catherine had described no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a calling. The transformation reached its crescendo, and Elena felt something like wings unfurling from her soul. Not physical wings, but extensions of power and purpose that connected her to forces far greater than herself. She opened eyes that now glowed with soft silver light and looked at her new partners with perfect understanding. "Elena Rodriguez, Queen of the Night Court," Dominic said formally. "Welcome to your new life." Elena smiled, feeling the weight of her new responsibilities settle comfortably on her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried new harmonics of power and authority. "Now, what do we do about the ancient threats you mentioned?" Catherine laughed, and for the first time in 4 centuries it was a sound of genuine joy rather than bitter amusement. "We fight them," she said simply, "together, as we should have been doing all along." Elena nodded, looking around the restored dining room where Margaret, Jessica, and Sophia sat peacefully, their memories safely altered and their trauma healed. Tomorrow they would wake up in their own homes with nothing but pleasant recollections of a dinner party that ended early. They would never know how close they had come to death, or that their salvation had come from a maid who chose to become something far greater than human. "There's one more thing I want to know," Elena said. "You mentioned that my future self called for help. How does that work?" Dominic exchanged a look with Catherine before answering. "Time isn't linear for our kind, Elena. Past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. When you're ready, you'll learn to navigate those temporal currents, and yes, you will eventually make that call, reaching back through time to ensure that events unfold exactly as they need to." "A temporal loop," Elena mused. "I save myself by calling for help that I haven't learned to send yet." "Precisely. It's one of the more complex aspects of our existence, but you'll master it eventually. After all, you already have." Elena found herself laughing at the impossibility of it all. 3 hours ago, she had been a simple maid worried about her employer's strange behavior. Now she was an immortal queen responsible for protecting humanity from threats beyond imagination. It should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like coming home. "So," she said, looking at her 2 partners in this new existence, "where do we start?" Catherine straightened her shoulders, and Elena could see the broken queen beginning to remember who she had once been. "We start with justice," she said firmly. "I have 4 centuries of mistakes to make right and victims whose stories deserve to be told." Dominic nodded approvingly, and after that we begin preparing for the challenges ahead. But tonight, we celebrate. Tonight the Night Court is whole again for the first time in 400 years. Elena felt a surge of anticipation for the work ahead. There would be difficulties, certainly. There would be moments of doubt and times when the burden felt almost impossible to bear. But there would also be lives saved, innocence protected, and a balance maintained that kept the world safe for those who could never know the true nature of the threats they faced. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows of the Morrison mansion, Elena Rodriguez, now Queen Elena of the Night Court, stood with her immortal partners and began planning for their first mission together. The ancient threats Dominic had mentioned were already stirring in the shadows, and somewhere in the world, innocent people were counting on protection they didn't even know they needed. But for the first time in 4 centuries, they wouldn't face those challenges alone. The Night Court was complete again, and Elena understood now that her desperate plea, "Come home, she's going to kill her," had been answered by powers far greater than she had ever imagined. She was home, and she was ready to stand guard over a world that would never know her name but would sleep more safely because she was watching. The maid who had once cleaned up other people's messes was now in position to clean up much larger problems. And as Elena looked at the peaceful faces of the 3 women whose lives she had saved, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The real work was just beginning.